Well, here's yet another reminder that the government will do everything in its power to be able to intercept all of your communications. On Friday, CNET's Declan McCullough reported that the FBI has been lobbying top internet companies like Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook to not oppose a proposal that would force them to provide backdoors for government surveillance. Now, they've been meeting behind closed doors with these companies, and the FBI's General Counsel's office has drafted a proposed law to amend the 1994 law called the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. Now, it's definitely not the first time that we've heard of the push for this policy. The FBI has for years been fear-mongering about what it calls the going dark problem, meaning that as technology advances, the fewer capabilities they have for surveillance in their investigations. But can they actually do all this without the big tech firms publicly not opposing the bill? And does the government even need backdoor access to get to your communications? Here to discuss this with me is Julian Sanchez, Research Fellow at the Cato Institute. Julian, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
For starters, this isn't the first time that we've heard something like this, right? In 2010, there was a lot of fuss, and so is this just a continuation of that? Is this an expansion of it?
I mean, in fact, it goes back a lot further than 2010. In the early 90s, I remember the FBI put out a memo threatening, warning that they would soon be, unable to do any kind of wiretaps because phones would all be encrypted. Their own reports haven't borne that out at all, but that led to the so-called crypto wars of the 90s. I mean, there was a big fight in the mid-90s. I still have a copy of the second issue of Wired magazine. It was all about this, that we needed to crack down on encryption or law enforcement would go completely blind. And of course, the encryption that they wisely did not try to stamp out at the time has become the absolute foundation of the modern internet economy. You could not have an internet economy without global, strong encryption. The truth is that at this point, that cat is out of the bag. I mean, they were right then. They made the right call then. But even if you thought they hadn't, it's sort of too late now. The tools to have secure, encrypted, and dispersed communications are out there. So, even if Facebook makes itself more insecure by trying writing in backdoors, it's not clear how much good that's going to do.
Well, so people are going to find ways around it, but then if that's the argument, then why is it so scary that they want the companies to create backdoors? I'm just curious how much, to be honest, right, how much can the feds already get? How much can the NSA already do? Do they even need a backdoor type of legislation?
Well, it is a little surreal to hear them using this going dark phrase when we live in, really, I think, the golden age of surveillance. I mean, so, we're learning, for example, that even local police departments now routinely use cell phones to physically track people. I mean, so the idea, even 10 or 15 years ago...
Golden age, I wouldn't call that the
golden age if you're in the business of
Uh-huh.
surveillance. But, the level of access to information they have now would have been almost inconceivable 15 years ago. The idea that every person is effectively carrying a tracking device around with them. And so it's really these small exceptions that are being treated as, a kind of crisis for law enforcement, which seems absolutely bizarre. I think what they are worried about is that if secure communication is easy and universal, you're never going to get the smart criminals who know enough to use their own encryption. Maybe what they don't want is sort of stupid criminals, basically, to accidentally get the benefit of secure systems for everyone. The trouble is, building in a backdoor does mean, pretty much by definition, you have to engineer everything to be less secure for everyone.
Are they mostly worried about, are they focusing on emails, on Facebook messages that you write with your friends, or is this about using Skype, right? Are these areas where it's really about having a video chat or a call with somebody that they can't get into?
Well, so in terms of the problems they have now, right? I mean, we know pretty well that it's not like they're getting turned away when they go to Google or Facebook. You do imagine that they might have a problem with Skype, which is an end-to-end peer-to-peer system, meaning there isn't a centralized point to wiretap. And it's actually, I mean, the really disturbing thing about this is that if you take seriously what they're proposing, entire architectures for communication would be illegal, because there isn't a way to build a truly peer-to-peer, end-to-end, which is a very efficient and secure way to do communications, but there isn't a way to do that with some kind of centralized backdoor. So what they would effectively be saying is that whole architecture, that whole model for communications would have to be banned
Suddenly that's illegal. But so then this is where like the politics of it becomes so interesting, right? So they're flying to Silicon Valley, they're having these backdoor meetings with these companies, and they're just trying to get them to not even come out and publicly support the bill, but just to not oppose it, like to not create a fuss. I mean, what are the chances that they could get the companies to do that, to play along?
I think it depends how much is in it for the companies. If stuff like this has safe harbors and various kind of exemptions from liability, and in particular if it has a potential for pay in it. I mean, a lot of different kinds of surveillance involve the government basically paying these companies for their time and trouble. So if you raise the fees high enough, you can make that a winning proposition for them. You have to assume that what the FBI is doing right now is looking at what happened with SOPA and realizing that you have a lot of people who are networked who aren't necessarily watching political news very closely, but that if, let's say, Wikipedia or Google or Facebook decided that they were opposed enough to something to stick a link on their front page, that you can, well, they learned with SOPA, you can generate tens and hundreds of thousands of calls, millions of calls.
But don't you also have to hope that then maybe the Googles and the Facebooks, of the world, after seeing what happened with SOPA and what their opposition to it did in terms of helping put the pressure on, that they could actually try to stand up, against an increasing surveillance state and take a stand? It's just not worth it for them?
These are private money-making companies, and there's not usually a lot of profit in standing up against the government as a general rule. So I wouldn't hold out too many hopes there, at least as long as the FBI is figuring out a way to make this worth their while to keep quiet about at least.
Oh, well, that always makes me feel great. All right, Julian, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.